I've never seen rivers turn to blood. Never smelled the rotting fish on the shore and the souring stickiness of the fresh water gone bad. I've never looked out to see the flowing clear water hidden beneath a carpet of sea creatures floating belly up, drawing flies, permeating the air with rot. I have no idea how one goes about digging for water. Not where, not how, not with what. And I've never known that kind of thirst. A rationing thirst, a days-long thirst. A thirst that invades your dreams and wakes you in the stagnant heat. A thirst that becomes your way of life. But I know there are people in my country today who cannot drink from the tap without poisoning the blood in their bodies. I know that there are people who have had their children taken away because they don't rank high enough in importance to fix their pipes. So their children risk either thirst or quenching themselves on their own sickness. I know that there are people in my city who are afraid of whether they'll be able to pay the water bill or if they'll lose the water when they lose the sink, when they lose the house. I've never seen the rivers turn to blood. But I know what it looks like when leaders do not care about the thirst of their people. I have never been overrun by frogs. I've never felt the need to search the dark corners of my house for them, or worried that they would ruin the drinking water. I've never had to throw food away because they found their way into the oven or the mixing bowl. I've never feared to go to sleep knowing that I may well feel the slimy touch in my waking. I've never in my life had to worry about a frog infestation, but I have hidden my food from rats. I've sighed and resigned myself to cleaning up the mess of flour and powder that I had planned to bake the next day. I've lain traps for them and seen them caught. I know what it is to feel the breaking of small, foul creatures into my space. And I've seen entire neighborhood infestations that could not be curbed. I've never had an infestation of frogs, but I've watched our leaders turn a blind eye to the pests driven from the homes of the wealthy or the large-scale development to consume entire neighborhoods of the poor. I've never seen a plague of gnats or flies or locusts. Never resigned myself to the sting and swelling of their bite. Never been overrun by the buzzing in my ear until the noise of it fades into my every background. I've never starved from the consumption of the crops. I've never starved at all. Never gone to bed hungry, never become sadly accustomed to the void in my belly. But I've seen the hunger in this land. I've sat with those who have waited days for a single meal, seen people wondering where they will be able to scrape together the money for a snack. I've seen strangers begging online for any financial help to save them from trying to ration one box of pasta into 3 days' worth of meals. I know that there are those among us who go to bed hungry on a regular basis and who wait in line every Thursday for the crumbs from the tables of the well-off. I've never starved from a plague of locusts, but I've seen what it looks like when leaders ignore their people's hunger. I've never seen an epidemic rage through the livestock. Never had to watch the source of my own sustenance slowly wither and die from infection. Never tried to tend cattle through sickness, and I've never had to suffer the disappointment of my entire livelihood, surrendering to the forces of nature in front of my eyes. But I know that there are those in this country right now who have felt the sudden shock of your worst fears coming to pass. I know that there are millions who are unsure how long they'll be able to keep their houses, their jobs, their cars. I know that poverty can sneak up from behind and turn your life into dust and chaos. And I know it can do that in an instant. And I know that it can also tease you into gradual submission after months and years of panic and fear. I've seen people brought to their knees and begging when infection stole from them their livelihood. I've never seen a pandemic run through the livestock of the land, but I've seen what it looks like when leaders ignore the poverty and sudden loss of security of their people. I've never seen a plague of boils. I was born into a time and place in which we had mostly learned how to avoid them. I've never felt them bubbling up all over my skin. I've never felt the pain of them bursting, nor the wet slime of their discharge. I've never been so covered in their pulsing pain that I was confined to my bed. But I've seen the ruin of infection threaten the people in my homeland. I've seen them take cover behind masks and stay inside for fear of exposure. I've sat at home wondering if the slightest abnormality in my own physical health heralded the clanging chimes of my own doom. I've been confined to my bed for illness, laying there for days and weeks, unsure if it will prove my own undoing. I've lost friends to the sudden oncoming of strange illness. I have watched a people cower in fear of the smallest living cells, and I know some who have succumbed to the microscopic terror. I've never seen a plague of boils, but I know what it looks like when leaders ignore the sickness of their people. I've never seen the land blighted by ice and fire. I have never felt the hail coming down so hard and fast that it covers every inch of the land. I've never watched fire come down from heaven and consume the fields we tend. I've never been struck by the thunder or frozen by the ice or feared destruction raining down from the sky. But I have seen storms consume the land in my country. I have seen floods cover over homes and buildings and cities. I have taken shelter from the storm. I have sat with my head between my knees in a windowless room, praying that the winds spare me and listening for the dooming sound of a freight train. I have seen the snow come down so relentlessly that houses caved in. I know that acres and acres of good land have been burned to ashes this year with homes and bodies among them. I've never seen fire rain down from the sky and hail cover the land, but I know what it looks like when leaders ignore the threats that come down on us from above and fail to care for the damage done. I've never seen a plague of darkness. I've hardly ever seen a world without street lights and porch lights and floodlights, or at the very least candlelight and moonlight and flashlight. I've never felt the total blindness that comes from a darkness so absolute that all around me is annihilated, never felt my way around because I was unable to see a few inches in front of my face. But I felt the weight of darkness in the land. I felt the surge of despair. I've seen people around the country struggle against their own hopelessness and fear and panic and sadness and resignation and numbness. I felt the darkness that dwells in the heart of every person spill out and cover us with its existential dread. I've never seen a plague of darkness, but I know what it looks like when leaders ignore the despairing across the nation. I've never experienced the death of a child, but I have been clutched in the arms of a man who has lost his only son and felt the madness, the desperation, the sensation of an unnatural order to the world. I've been witness to the sorrow that can fill the gut of a parent until the end of their days. I have seen the realization dawn on a father that he has taken for granted the only thing that matters and fixed his eyes on trifles and petty skirmishes. I have seen the loss that can call a father to regret his every cruelty and slacken in a resolution that had been so immovable up until the very instant grief descended upon his life. I know, too, what it looks like when leaders ignore the grief that envelops the people. I have seen them cavalierly order destruction and death to those of other tribes, and I have seen them neglect the lives in their care and stop their ears from hearing the laments of mothers throughout the land. I have seen them reason themselves out of remorse and abdicate responsibility over lives in their care. I know that even now there are mothers languishing after their sons were sacrificed to state brutality. I know that there are women who weep from having their babies torn from their arms and locked in a preschool jail cell. I know there are mothers who have no idea where their children have been taken and fear they may never again see the lives they created and nurtured. I know what it is to bear witness to the all-consuming grief of a loss of a child, and I know what it is to watch leaders harden their hearts so that mourning and remain unmoved by the people's cries. I too have felt the power of a hardened heart. I have closed myself off to the pain of others. I have walked past the suffering and offered no aid. I have blanched from the embarrassment of ignoring those in need and heeded the temptation to excuse myself from their pain. And I have watched as the leaders of the nation have hardened their hearts and ignored the pain and given themselves reasons to look the other way. I've been callous myself. I have felt the pain of the callousness of others, and I've seen the widespread destruction that callousness can wreak over the land. I think that when we read stories like this one, we somehow manage to simultaneously distance ourselves too much and center ourselves too much. We imagine that the lives the people in the Bible have led are so different from ours that there is no way to translate them, when in reality, the core truths in this text are so unchanging, we barely notice that we're living out the same stories. At the same time, we reduce these stories to battles for our own individual souls and well-being instead of battles for the liberation of an entire people, salvation of a nation, redemption of the planet. We never manage to see ourselves in the shoes of the plain, ordinary people living through a chaotic time of great change and upheaval, but look around. Here we are. I felt myself more and more drawn to the story of the Exodus for months now. And as I finally sit down and read it all out, all the way through, I can understand the feeling that the entire world is being consumed by chaos and wildness, and we're constantly suffering from events immeasurably beyond our control. I have felt that feeling at the very least. I'm getting to be familiar with the world shifting underneath my feet. Truly everyone who has ever lived has lived through some turbulence. That's what it is to be human. And yet, there are some times when so much seems to happen at once. We live through them as if we are holding our breath. And destruction can come and has come relentlessly through the ages. We know this and fear we may become echoes of the same. We are living through a difficult time. There is much fear and there are many wrongs we feel powerless to stop. And we don't quite yet know how the story will end. There are many things we don't know. I know that I have never felt the immense pain and sadness and bone-deep trauma of slavery. Never fallen on my bed in the evening feeling tired down to every fiber of my muscle, knowing that I have worked all day to build another man's riches. I have never felt the sting of the lash, nor feared the harshness of a man who believes himself to be my master. I have never known the pain of chains that endure through centuries, nor have I ever known what it is to resist slavery. Never known the pounding of my heart as I reject the lie of another man that I have no life of my own and no purpose besides his. I've never had to walk through the waters with a wall on either side of me that could collapse and drown me at any moment. I have never had to have that kind of faith, and I have never had to choose between living out my days in the service of another or facing the threat of torture, dismemberment, and death should I walk away and be recaptured. I have never watched those who sought to kill me washed away by the sea. I've never been pursued by chariots and never watched them fall beneath the tide. I've never watched those who cruelly subdued an entire race drive themselves into the sea in their lust for wealth and power. I've never seen the faces of those horrified soldiers who realize too late that they've dedicated themselves to a lifestyle of death and destruction, and that death and destruction is coming for them just as sure as it came for their victims. I've never felt the thrill in my heart of one who is suddenly unpursued, who only moments before was certain of doom and is now forever liberated. And I've never felt liberation. I've felt freedom for my entire life thus far. But I've never felt the chains broken and never known what it is to live in a land of jubilee, in which all are provided for and no one slaves for the wealth of another. I've never felt the positive peace that Martin Luther King Jr. speaks of, the presence of justice across the land. Though I have felt what it is to be free myself, I've never felt the freedom that comes when every single one of us is free and when there is no injustice anywhere threatening the justice that is everywhere. And I know that we all feel chaos and turbulence, much like the Egyptians felt. And I know that we all feel the weight of apprehension because we're unsure of how this will end. We have, therefore, some sense of what it is to walk through the walls of water in search of a better world, and can perhaps relate to that terror. And things could go wrong in any one of infinite ways. We are never far enough from destruction. But I choose to remember this story, this one, in which the chaos that consumed the land brought about the liberation of a people and brought destruction to their captors. I choose to remember that there are times in which the mighty drown themselves in their own hard-heartedness, and those who suffered feel what it is to be free. I choose to remember that story. Remember that sometimes the road scattered on all sides with tribulation ends in deliverance. I choose to examine the ways that I, like the Egyptians, blind myself to the suffering of others, and I choose to follow the example of Moses and the Hebrews, who took great risk for the chance of a better world. I choose to read this story because it tells me that the story can end well, can end in a way better than we could have ever imagined during the turmoil of the blood, the frogs, the flies, the fire and ice and despair, and yes, the sickness and infection. I choose to remember this story because it is the only way to remember the endings I like to see, and there's no way of dedicating yourself to the work of hope without remembering that stories can end well and believing that we can help write the ending. Thank you.